APM students. In this video, let's demystify a difficult topic. That topic is Kaizen Costing, and it falls under the quality area of the APM syllabus. I'd like to do two things in this video with you. One, let's dive into the concept. I'd like to explain what Kaizen Costing is all about, and then let's look at how it's examined and how you can craft an answer that will give you a comfortable pass. Kaizen is a Japanese word, and it means positive change or continuous improvement. It's also a business philosophy that promotes the concept of a regular, small, incremental improvement. And this was popularized when Japanese manufacturing took off around the world in the 1980s, when Toyota became a worldwide brand. Now, before we dig into Kaizen Costing, it's helpful to review traditional costing so we can compare Kaizen Costing to the traditional approach, what came before it. Have a look at these old photos. This is depicting the traditional manufacturing environment that was prevalent last century, the beginning of the 1900s. It was in this era that the concept of standard costing was created. Let's recap this traditional approach to costing, standard costing, then we'll compare it to Kaizen costing. Well, back in the olden days, it was a top-down approach. Management made the decisions. It was my way or the highway. And with the help of management accountants, a standard cost per unit would be determined for control purposes. So management accountants would investigate the manufacturing process. They would find what inputs are required to produce one cost unit. What does it cost for direct materials? What does it cost for direct labor? How much overheads will we allocate to a cost unit? And we would get then a budgeted cost per unit. Again, this would be a top-down affair. Management accountants would do this work with little input from the workforce. With this standard cost per unit, a budget could be set, and we would then use the budget as a cost control target. So at the end of a business period, a month or a quarter, we'd look at our actual costs and compare those to the flexed budget costs. And then we would look at why the actual cost was different from the flexed budgeted cost and try to take corrective action. Nowadays, looking back, we can see some problems or limitations of using this approach in a modern environment. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, it's a top-down approach. So we're ignoring the insights and the knowledge that our production team has. And it doesn't promote cost reduction. It promotes cost control. There's no benefit for exceeding that cost per unit, for example, if we beat it by 10%. This standard costing approach will be less useful in a dynamic, fast-changing environment. For example, manufacturing is often done in customized small batches. So having one standard cost per unit wouldn't really help for controlling the costs in the customized batch of goods. And we also see that life cycles are shorter, so things are just changing at a rapid pace. So this idea of a predetermined standard, less useful nowadays. Moving on to Kaizen Costing. First thing we need to recognize is that in the 80s, we see a shift in management style taking on the philosophy from the Japanese approach. Now we see a bottom-up approach. Management recognizes that the workforce is not just a cost to control, but it's a real resource, and that they should be involved, and that when the workforce has an idea, management listens, and if it's a good idea, they will implement that idea because no one knows more about the production process than the skilled workforce. That's the bottom-up management approach. We see another change in philosophy, the recognition that cost reduction is always possible in an environment of continuous improvement. We're never happy with the status quo. We can always improve the cost per unit with the inputs from our skilled workforce. We can find some process improvement. We can find some waste to eliminate. Instead of having a cost control target, we'll now work with cost reduction targets. How can we achieve cost reduction? Well, first thing is the elimination of waste. We can eliminate or reduce defective units. We can reduce idle time. We can reduce overproduction and inventory. And linked to that, let's eliminate non-value adding activities. So, are there too many handoffs in the production process? Are there too many material movements? That's called conveyance, when the inventory is moved around the warehouse and the factory too many times. And can we improve cycle time or time per unit? These are ways a company can achieve continuous improvement and cost reduction. Now that we have a better understanding of what Kaizen costing is all about, let's move on to how it's often examined in APM. To do that, I've opened a question in the Study Hub, Pit Lane Electronics. I recommend you put this on your must-do list of revision questions because it covers target costing and it covers Kaizen costing. If we look in the first exhibit, we can learn about this company. We also see our first clue. And let's do that. We see the Pit Lane manufacturing company. They make electrical components. They have a big customer. Demand has been constant. Looks like they're working in a traditional environment because they're using variance analysis. We also see the clue. Look here at the bottom. We see that they run several production lines at 2 production sites. They've got 2 factories in different areas of the country. The factory's layout is poorly designed, and the production process requires lots of transportation. So they're setting us up with examples of waste that we could eliminate using the Kaizen costing approach. If we now open the requirements exhibit, we can see that there are 6 marks here for Kaizen costing. So a borderline pass would be 3 marks. An efficient pass would be 4 marks. A comfortable pass would be 5 marks. So our objective will be to craft an answer with 5 well-developed ideas, answering the question asked by the CEO precisely. And to go further, to find the exact requirement, we need to dig into the exhibits and find that embedded requirement. After reading the exhibits further, we find the specific task from the directors of Pit Lane. They're worried about a cost gap. The expected cost is higher than a target cost. So we need cost reduction. And if we look at the second requirement here, they want us to give advice on how Kaizen costing can be used to help the booster project achieve the financial performance objective set by the shareholders. In other words, how can we use Kaizen costing to reduce the cost per unit? I found the number of marks I'm going for, 5. I found the embedded task. Advise how Kaizen costing could be used to reduce the cost gap. Well, I'm now going to make a plan right in the word processor. As I go through the exhibits, I'm going to develop my ideas. The first thing that I'll do out of the gate is define my term. There is usually a mark for defining your technical terms, but only 1 mark. I'm not going to go crazy. I'll give a 1 or 2 sentence definition of what Kaizen costing is all about. And then, using the clues from the scenario, I will explain all of the waste that could be reduced using the Kaizen approach. And I'll also mention that we've got to change the approach of management from traditional, top-down, to a modern approach, bottom-up. And reading the scenario, I found in that first exhibit, they mentioned the different manufacturing sites that are far away from each other, and then the poor layout of the production lines. So right away, the Kaizen costing approach could help us reduce the motion of reduce the movement of the inventory, reduce the risk of damage, and help reduce the wasted time. In further exhibits, we learn about the damaged subcomponents. And wow, if we applied Kaizen costing, that would help us eliminate the defective units, and then we'd have fewer scrapped units, fewer reworked units, all of that reducing the cost per unit. We also see that the workforce is not encouraged to participate. This means there's a lack of specialist knowledge. We might have a demotivated workforce. And if we encourage these workers to share their ideas, that's going to, again, help us achieve all of these objectives and help us reduce that cost gap. After I've planned out my answer, I've read those exhibits, I've organized my thoughts, I'll start crafting my answer. Here's a snippet of what I would write. Well, in my plan, I said I'll start with a quick definition of Kaizen costing, and I'll use a heading to help the marker understand my answer, to signpost what I'm doing, and I will use plain English explaining what it's all about. This is a modern approach in contrast to standard costing, where an empowered workforce is encouraged to achieve regular, incremental cost reductions. Okay? Maybe I add 1 more short sentence, but that's the approach. A quick, efficient definition, not a long-winded academic definition. And I'm going to then immediately get into answering that question from the directors, how Kaizen costing will help us reduce that cost gap. And the first thing that I'll say is it's going to help us reduce the non-value adding activities. Notice the headings. And I'm going to link everything that I write to the story. We see that production has wasted motion, transporting the units between the poorly designed factory sites. The Kaizen approach would encourage the production team to take incremental steps to improving this. The result would be improved time per unit and potentially less damage. Okay, this means faster cycle time and lower rework and scrap costs and a lower cost per unit. right? That's what the directors want us to achieve, lower cost per unit. That's how Kaizen costing will help. Moving on to my next several paragraphs, now I'm going to use the clues that I found in the next exhibit to craft my answer. And let me read it for you. Reduce damaged goods. We see that many of the fragile subcomponents are damaged in production. This would be another improvement area to exploit under the Kaizen approach. The production team will be encouraged to find new ways of working to reduce this. For example, handling or storing the work in progress differently, or using different packaging between the production lines. Guys, I'm using my imagination. I'm trying to use examples from production. This is going to help me earn technical marks because I'm building up my answer, but it's also going to help me earn the business acumen marks when I'm using relevant examples. This should reduce the damaged goods and the cost per unit. Advanced performance management team. That is the approach that I will use in my answer. Kaizen costing. It's about eliminating waste, eliminating non-value adding activities, improving cycle time so we can decrease the cost per unit, and I'm illustrating those concepts in my answer. So I would write up another paragraph or two, and I would be quite happy that I've achieved 4 or 5 marks out of the 6 marks needed, and I would have a comfortable pass on this requirement. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, the Kaizen costing approach and how we would use Kaizen costing in an APM exam question. As a next step, I recommend you go into the Study Hub. You can type Kaizen into that search window. It'll bring you right to the chapter on Kaizen costing. You can read about it a bit more. When you're done with that, make sure you attempt question Pit Lane, as it covers quality, it covers target costing, and Kaizen costing. That's a wrap on our video. Good luck on your upcoming exam.